Have you ever sat in your favorite chair, stared out the window, and thought to yourself, where did I go wrong? Maybe you remember the years you gave up sleep, skipped vacations, and put your heart into raising your children, only to grow older and feel like you've somehow disappeared from their lives. You're not alone. Thousands of parents quietly ask themselves the same thing. They raised their kids with love, guidance, and sacrifice. But now, it's like the phone doesn't ring unless there's a problem. Messages go unread. Holidays come and go. And you're lucky if you get a last-minute text. And when you do speak up, calmly, honestly, you're told you're overreacting. Or worse, they shut you down completely. And so here you are, silenced, brushed aside, feeling invisible in the very family you built. But what if I told you that your silence, your true, intentional silence, could be the loudest, most powerful message you'll ever send? You see, there comes a point when words just don't work anymore. You've explained, you've asked nicely, you've even begged, you've tried being patient, tried being firm, tried being understanding. But the more you give, the more they seem to take, not out of malice, but out of habit. They've grown so used to your presence, your help, your unconditional support, that they've stopped seeing it as a gift. They've started seeing it as a given. And that's when something in you shifts, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You decide, I've said enough, not to punish, not to get even, but to protect what's left of your energy, to reclaim your peace of mind, to stop pouring from a cup that hasn't been refilled in years. So you begin to step back, not with dramatic ultimatums, but with quiet, steady detachment. You stop chasing. You stop texting first. You stop trying to be the one who always keeps the relationship afloat. At first, it might feel cold. It might feel unnatural. You might wonder, am I giving up on my own children? But what you're really doing is giving them a chance to finally feel what your absence means. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Some people only recognize your value when it's gone, and when that someone is your child, it hurts deeply. But sometimes that absence is exactly what they need to wake up, to realize your presence was never guaranteed. Now, I know this isn't easy, especially if you're the kind of parent who always showed up, the one who forgave first, the one who made excuses for their bad behavior, saying they're just busy, or they're going through a phase, or they'll come around. But as the years go on and that phase becomes the norm, you start to wonder, what about me? You start to realize that peace isn't found in sacrificing yourself to keep a one-sided relationship going. Peace comes when you stop talking into the void and start listening to your own needs for once. And that's where stepping back begins. There's a quiet dignity in choosing not to fight anymore, not because you've given up, but because you've grown up. You realize that you can't force someone to care. You can't teach someone to value what they refuse to see. But you can protect yourself. You can stop bleeding emotionally every time they dismiss you, or make you feel like you're just a burden in their busy lives. When you withdraw, you create a space. And in that space, something surprising begins to happen. Not just to them, but to you. They notice the silence. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. When the weekly check-in you used to initiate doesn't come. When your reminder calls stop. When the quiet lingers longer than they expected suddenly, the one they assumed would always be there isn't. At first they might feel relief. Fewer obligations, less guilt. But with time, that relief turns into a nagging curiosity, a discomfort, a sense that something's missing, that something isn't right. And this is where the shift happens. Not because you said something clever or dramatic, but because you said nothing at all. They start to question, did I do something wrong? Did I go too far? Have I lost them? You see, your absence becomes the teacher. It does what all your words could not. It forces them to sit in the discomfort of your distance. And unlike your past explanations, this time, there's no argument to be had. No debate, just silence. And silence can be deafening. Now here's what's really powerful. While they're sitting there, wondering why the energy shifted, why they no longer feel, your hand holding the line, you're doing something else entirely. You're rebuilding, recharging, reclaiming. Because stepping back isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about learning to rest instead of constantly reaching. It's about finally taking that walk, that trip, that breath you've postponed for decades. It's about pouring back into yourself after years of pouring into everyone else. You start noticing that your days feel lighter. You're not checking your phone, waiting for a message that never comes. You're not rehearsing how to bring up your feelings without being shut down. You're not constantly managing your disappointment. Instead, you're enjoying your coffee, reading the book you've meant to read for months, listening to music just because, sitting in the peace of your own company, without needing anyone to validate it. And don't misunderstand, this doesn't mean you've stopped loving your children. Far from it, love doesn't disappear when you set a boundary. In fact, sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do, for both sides. You're giving them space to grow, to reflect, to realize. And yes, some will reach out again. Not because you guilted them into it, but because they missed you. Not the version of you that chased, fixed, and forgave, but the version of you that stood tall in your worth and quietly stepped away when you weren't being treated with care. That version commands respect. So if you've found yourself on the edge of letting go, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion, know that you are not weak. You are not selfish. You are not wrong for wanting peace. You are wise enough to stop explaining your worth and brave enough to let your silence speak for you. And when it does, oh, how loud it can be. When you first decide to step back from your child, there's often a storm of emotions swirling inside. Guilt, sadness, confusion, sometimes even fear. You might ask yourself, what if they think I don't love them? What if they never come back? That inner voice, the one that's been trained over decades to nurture, to comfort, to fix, it doesn't quiet easily, especially when it's your child on the other end. But here's something worth remembering. Just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt shows up when you're doing something right, something unfamiliar, something necessary for your own healing. And here's the deeper truth. When you go silent, when you truly detach, it doesn't just create a pause in the relationship, it causes a shift in power. Because for years, maybe even decades, the emotional weight of the relationship was on your shoulders. You were the glue. You kept the birthdays going, the check-ins happening, the communication flowing. You gave and gave, hoping they'd eventually understand. But now, without your presence, without your constant effort, the imbalance is exposed. They start to feel it, not through confrontation, but through consequence. Suddenly, they don't know what's going on in your world. They don't know if you're upset, if you're distant, or if you've simply had enough. That uncertainty stirs discomfort, because when someone is used to you always being available, your silence is a disruption. It breaks the pattern they've come to depend on. And that's when something powerful happens. They begin to notice. They might not say anything. They might not reach out right away. But they're thinking about it. The questions creep in quietly. Why haven't they called? Did something happen? Are they okay? Or maybe, did I go too far? Have I taken them for granted? This isn't about manipulation. It's about reflection. Your distance becomes a mirror, one they can't look away from. It shows them the space you once filled, and it forces them to sit with what that space really meant. And while they're sitting with that, you're learning something too. You're learning how much peace there is in not having to explain yourself anymore. You're learning what it feels like to wake up and not carry emotional tension the minute you check your phone. You're learning that being alone isn't the same as being lonely, especially when you're finally choosing yourself. Now, none of this works if you're half in, half out. If you keep checking their Facebook to see if they noticed you stopped commenting, if you send a just checking in text a few days later, that's not detachment, that's performance. And they can sense that. True distance takes courage. It takes a quiet kind of strength that most people never develop. And yes, it will test you. You'll miss them. You'll think about all the good times. You might even cry a little when no one's watching. That's okay. That's human. But every time you don't reach out, every time you resist the urge to break the silence, just to feel momentary relief, you're getting stronger. You're building emotional muscles that protect you from being taken for granted, from being dismissed, from being emotionally drained by someone who should have known better. And this strength doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity. Clarity that you're not here to beg someone to value you. Clarity that you deserve relationships rooted in mutual respect, not guilt-driven obligation. Clarity that your worth isn't up for debate, not even with your own children. Now, let's talk about what starts to happen in their mind as this silence continues. Psychologically, we're wired to pay attention when something that used to be consistent suddenly stops. Think about it. If your favorite radio station went off, the air without warning, wouldn't you notice? Wouldn't you wonder why? It's the same with people. Your child may not realize it yet, but your disappearance triggers a mental spiral. At first, it might just be a vague unease, but then it deepens. They start to revisit old conversations. They replay that last phone call. They remember that one time you seemed quiet or said you felt unappreciated. And suddenly they can't stop thinking about it. That's the power of distance. You didn't yell, you didn't send a long emotional letter, you didn't demand attention, you simply withdrew. And that silence, it becomes their obsession. They may not show it, at least not right away. They might keep posting selfies or pretending nothing's wrong. But late at night, when the noise fades and the screens go dark, they'll feel it. They'll remember your voice, your presence, your care. And that's when the longing begins. They start to miss the very things they once dismissed. Your check-in calls, your concern, your advice, the way you remembered the little things, the way you forgave so easily. All those pieces of you they treated like background noise now feel like a song they wish they could hear again. But they can't, not unless you allow it. Because now you're the one in control, not out of revenge, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. You see, most people spend their lives reacting. And maybe you've done that too, especially as a parent. Reacting to every crisis, every complaint, every emotional outburst. But silence? Silence is not a reaction. It's a decision. It's a declaration. It says, I'm no longer participating in something that drains me. It says, I choose me now. And in that choice, there's incredible healing. Because while they're busy analyzing your absence, you're using that space to return to yourself. Maybe you're picking up old hobbies. Maybe you're spending more time in nature. Or reconnecting with friends who truly make you feel seen. Maybe you're simply enjoying the quiet, not as loneliness, but as liberation. You start to laugh more, to rest better, to breathe deeper. And without even trying, you become someone who no longer needs their attention. Someone who's built such a peaceful life, their chaos can no longer invade it. And that's the moment when something shifts in them. They start to wonder, not just where you went, but how you've changed. They sense the difference, they feel the distance. and something inside them begins to stir. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes even years. But eventually, the check-in comes. Maybe it's a text that says, "Hey, just thinking of you." Maybe it's a birthday message out of nowhere. Maybe it's a voicemail you weren't expecting. However it comes, the silence breaks. Not because you demanded it, but because your absence finally spoke loud enough. And now, the decision is yours. That moment, when your phone lights up with their name after weeks, months, or even years, it can bring a mix of emotions. Your heart might skip, your breath might catch. It's natural, you're human. But what you do next, that's where the real strength comes in. Because this moment isn't about them. It's about you. About the version of you who made the hard choice to step back. About the version of you who chose silence over sacrifice. Peace over people-pleasing. Now they're reaching out. Maybe just to test the waters. Maybe out of genuine concern. Or maybe, deep down, they're hoping the door they used to walk through freely is still cracked open. But this time, it's your door, and you get to decide whether to answer. It's easy to get swept back into old patterns. Maybe they sound sweet. Maybe they finally say something kind. Maybe they act like nothing ever happened. Just casually picking up where things left off. That's the test. Because if you're not careful, you could find yourself right back where you started. Explaining your worth, managing their moods, and wondering why your needs always get lost in the mix. But you're not the same person who stayed silent out of desperation. You stayed silent out of discipline. So when they return, and they almost always do, the question becomes, have they changed, or are they just uncomfortable? Only you can tell the difference. If their message is light and surface level, a hey or a heart emoji, take a breath. You don't owe anyone a reaction. Your silence has already said more than any words could. And if their message is full of emotion, regret, questions, even apologies, you still don't have to respond right away. You have every right to sit with it. Ask yourself, does this feel like connection or control? Are they coming back because they truly see you differently, or because your absence made them uncomfortable with themselves? Whatever the reason, the power lies in your response, or your lack of it. You might choose to reply. If you do, let it come from your new foundation. Calm, clear, and centered. Maybe something simple like, "Thank you for reaching out. I've been taking time to focus on myself." That's it. You don't owe them explanations. You're not looking for validation. You're simply stating your truth, without bitterness, without need, or you might not reply at all. And that's okay too. Choosing not to engage is still a decision. It doesn't mean you're holding a grudge. It means you've learned to protect your peace. Either way, the old dynamic, the one where you chase, fix, explain, is over. Now, some children might be genuinely changed by your absence. They may return more grounded, more respectful, more aware of how they treated you. That happens. And when it does, the relationship can begin again, not as an obligation, but as a mutual choice. But don't confuse a moment of guilt with real growth. Guilt can fade quickly. Growth takes time. You're looking for consistency, not convenience. And here's something else. Not every relationship needs to be repaired. That's a hard truth, especially when it comes to our own children. But the reality is, some people will never see your value until they're too far away to reach it. And that's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of where they are in their journey, and whether or not they're willing to meet you where you are now. You've grown, you've healed, you've remembered how to breathe again. That's not something you should ever give up, just to make someone else comfortable. So if they return and you choose to engage, set the tone. This time, it's not about being the parent who sacrifices everything. It's about being a whole person who loves but also demands respect, who cares but doesn't carry the whole emotional load, who shows up only where they're truly welcomed. And if they don't return, or if they return only to test, manipulate, or pretend nothing ever happened, you'll know you made the right decision by stepping back. Because here's the truth. Some lessons only sink in through absence. Not because you're cruel, but because you finally stopped cushioning the impact of their behavior. You let the consequences speak louder than any lecture ever could. And while they sit with that, you keep going. Because what you do while you're gone, that's where your true power lives. You don't just disappear and sit still. You rise. You rediscover the joy of your own company. You walk in nature. You pick up hobbies that light your soul. You meet people who see you as you are now, not just as who you were. You eat meals slowly. You laugh more. You take up space. And the beautiful part is you begin to attract people, not because you're trying to be needed, but because you're finally just being yourself, peaceful, whole, grounded. And your child, if they ever do, look your way again. They'll see someone who no longer needs their attention, but who chooses everything in life with intention. And that's the greatest lesson of all, because now they're not just thinking about where you went. They're wondering how they ever let you slip away. By now, you've done something most people never have the courage to do. You didn't lash out, you didn't beg, you didn't try to prove your worth to someone who refused to see it. You made the quietest, strongest move there is. You walked away, and you stayed away. And now the question becomes, how do you keep it going? How do you hold the line when your heart wants to reach out? When the silence gets heavy, when the habit of being there tries to pull you back in? That's the hardest part. Staying ghosted, not out of punishment, but out of principle. Because this isn't just a strategy, it's a mindset, a new way of living that says, I will no longer betray myself just to stay connected to someone else. The truth is, silence can be uncomfortable, especially for parents who've spent their whole lives being involved, being supportive, being available. You might wake up and still feel that itch to check on them, to fix what's broken, to see if maybe they finally changed. But every time you don't, every time you resist the urge to re-enter that old emotional cycle, you're not losing something. You're gaining something. You're gaining strength, clarity, confidence. You're proving to yourself that your peace matters more than their attention, that your life, your health, your happiness, your time is sacred and no longer up for negotiation. You don't need closure. You don't need their approval. You don't need to explain why you left. You already did the hardest part. You chose you. And here's what's truly beautiful about that choice. It begins to shape everything else in your life. You find yourself becoming more present in the right relationships, the ones that feel safe, mutual, and fulfilling. You have more energy for the people who do call just to hear your voice, who do appreciate your stories, who light up when you walk into a room. You laugh more freely. You rest more deeply. You stop overthinking every message that doesn't come. You stop living in the past. You stop hoping that someone will magically change. And you realize you've already changed. You're no longer the parent who tolerates being ignored. You're the person who respects themselves too much to stay in spaces where love is conditional, transactional, or hollow. And the world feels different when you stand in that energy. People sense it. They may not know what shifted, but they feel it. The quiet confidence, the peace in your eyes, the way you no longer chase, explain, or beg. That's what makes you magnetic. Not noise, not drama, not guilt, but grace. And just in case you ever feel doubt creeping back in, let me offer this. You don't need to speak to be heard. You don't need to show up in their lives to prove your love. You don't need to break your silence to soften their discomfort. You have done more than enough. And if one day they truly, genuinely come back, not with empty words, but with changed hearts, you'll know. Not by what they say, but by how they show up, and you'll still get to choose. You can open the door, or you can keep it closed. Not out of revenge, but because now you decide what love looks like in your life. And love, my friend, starts with how you treat yourself. So don't let anyone, not even your own child, pull you back into a pattern that cost you your peace. Because you've earned that peace. You've earned mornings that start without anxiety. You've earned afternoons that aren't spent waiting by the phone. You've earned evenings filled with joy, not judgment. You've earned the right to live a life that feels good to you, even if it makes others uncomfortable. So keep walking in your strength. Keep rising in your silence. Keep shining in your truth. And if someone ever asks what happened, why you stopped showing up, stopped calling, stopped giving, you don't owe them a single word. Your life now speaks for itself. Let it say this: I am no longer available to be taken for granted. I loved deeply, I gave fully, but I've chosen peace. And I will never apologize for choosing myself. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this message resonates with your heart, share your story in the comments. Not just for you, but for someone else out there who may need the courage to walk away, to go quiet, and to grow louder in their silence. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. This is your space for truth, healing, and power. New videos every week to help you live with strength, wisdom, and peace. Here's to loving yourself fully, protecting your peace fiercely, and becoming the strongest version of who you were always meant to be. At any age, stay strong, stay silent, stay free. We'll see you in the next one.